This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below.
I was watching all of the best teams, all of these teams that I've been told that the Cleveland Browns can't touch, that the Cleveland Browns aren't in the same class of. And I can't help but come away with but one takeaway. Browns can beat them. I watched the Dolphins play the Cowboys, and I thought to myself, Browns can beat them. I watched the Ravens play the 49ers. I thought to myself, the Browns already beat them. Both. One with PJ Walker, one in M&T Bank Stadium. So it wouldn't really be that shocking if they beat them again. I watched the Philadelphia Eagles play, and I'm like, yeah, the Browns could probably beat them. And the more and more teams you add to that list, Kansas City, I'm like, man, I think the Browns could beat them too. We already know how I feel about Jacksonville and some of the other teams in the conversation. And the more and more teams you add to this list, the more and more teams you put on this plate of teams you really do think the Cleveland Browns could beat, even with all of the injuries that they have, you have to start asking yourself, at what point are the Cleveland Browns just contenders? Now, it's funny. After the Browns beat Baltimore in Baltimore, our takeaway from that was that the Browns are Super Bowl contenders. Deshaun had finally looked like how we wanted him to look. He was making the plays that we wanted him to make. We were getting what we needed on defense, even on the road against a top-level opponent. Our run game was there. Our passing game was there. Our defense was there. We all looked at that team after that game, for the most part, and said to ourselves, the Browns are real contenders. And then Deshaun Watson went out for the rest of the year. And that kind of shook everything, right? Expectations kind of got reset after that, especially when DTR got in there and, didn't have the greatest showings. I think people kind of overblew how bad he was in that. I don't think he was that bad. I don't think he was necessarily even bad in some of those outings, but he wasn't great. And it was kind of clear, or at least it felt like, for the Browns to have any hopes to even win a playoff game, this was going to have to be a carry job. And we know that in the NFL, carry jobs have a limited shelf supply, especially when you have to carry your quarterback. So you watch that, your expectations go back down. Browns fans come back to earth, right? We came back to earth. But then DTR gets hurt. Joe Flacco steps in and, throws for a good amount of yardage. He looks pretty okay. You feel a little excited about it, but you're not there yet. And then you play Jacksonville, a real playoff team, a team with an 8-6 record at the time, a team that's leading their division, a team that you will very likely play in the playoffs if they win their division. A real test, right? Even Trevor Lawrence played in that game. Now, it wasn't Cleveland. If you played Jacksonville in the playoffs, you probably play them in Jacksonville. But they're not a great home team this year, so I don't know if that really changes anything for them. But you play Jacksonville and you beat Jacksonville. It wasn't as convincing as you would want because you could have blew them out, but you made some mistakes that kept the game close. So we were like, man, we're close. We can win games, though. We can win games. We continue to win games. And then you beat the Bears in similar fashion, and you're still like, yeah, we can win games. And then you get this Texans game. And look, I know people are going to put an asterisk on it because you beat Case Keenum. And Case Keenum is not necessarily the threat on offense that CJ Stroud is. And I'm not even trying to make that point. But the point I am trying to make is the one thing this Browns team struggled to do post Deshaun Watson or without Deshaun Watson all year is win by a margin, right? If you look at all the wins the Cleveland Browns had when Deshaun Watson was not in the game, they were by like 1-score margins at best. The Browns weren't beating anybody by like 14 or even 7 without Deshaun Watson in the game. That was the one thing you were missing with Deshaun. Deshaun, for all the things that people were critical about him, he really didn't turn the ball over that much, and he did keep the offense going. It didn't look the smoothest at all times, but he was able to run, get first downs, get the offense down the field, and at least get and have a really high score percentage out of his drives. Like, he was doing a good job at doing that. And that led to a high point margin versus teams, good or bad. With Joe, with DTR at this point, and with PJ, you weren't winning games by those margins. And we knew, hey, at some point, we're going to have to look like the Cleveland Browns defense on the road. At some point, we're going to have to play a clean enough game at quarterback to where we can win by a margin on offense. And then this game happens, and it happens. And the reason I feel like Browns fans are back up on that hope is that, right? Not only did Joe Flacco have those good moments that he's had the last 3 weeks, it was sustained, it was improved, and he was much, much safer with the football. I think anybody, including myself, who's been critical of anything that Joe Flacco has done over the last 4 weeks, the biggest criticism was the turnovers, right? Because the turnovers were a little ridiculous. And not only were the turnovers ridiculous, they were happening in bad parts of the field, right? On the 20, opening a drive or just setting up the defense with the ball in plus territory. Yes, Joe Flacco threw 2 interceptions in this game. One of them doesn't really count, right? It's a jump ball interception in the back of the end zone, trying to throw the ball up because we didn't have a kicker. So if you're counting that interception, okay, cool, whatever. I don't really care to. The other interception was a deep ball chance. He threw it down the field. It got picked off at like the 30. I'm willing to live with those kind of interceptions, right? Where you're just taking a chance. It didn't work out. It was a fine enough shot to take. Got a little greedy. It was definitely a heat check, but hey, they didn't get the ball at the 20. Like, it was basically a punt when it came to field position. It was on first down, but it came on a punt. Well, it worked like a punt, basically. Those 2 interceptions didn't really affect the game. They had minimal impact on the game because of where they happened and when they happened. In the critical parts of the game, he didn't throw an interception. So we were all good. I think he left the game up 30. I think the Browns were up 30 or something like that when he left the game. And that's when, in my mind, it started to cross my mind, at least, when I'm like, hey, we're getting starting level quarterback play out of Joe Flacco, right? Like, it seems like he actually needed more time. When somebody's 38 years old, time can kind of be a dual-edged sword, because if he's 28, you would say, hey man, he needs to get 4 games into the system and then he'll know it better and like know how the players operate in it and be able to play better in it. But at 38, you're not just fighting the battle of learning the playbook. You're fighting the battle of age. And there was a real question on how he would fight that battle. And now that we're in 4 games in and he's playing better than he did when he started, you're not as concerned about that battle. I'm not as concerned about that battle, which to me means we're going to be all right. And if Joe Flacco is giving you starting quarterback level play to anything above that, you're in a great place. We mentioned when this all happened, when Deshaun Watson went out for the year, I mentioned all we need from the quarterback position, from DTR at the time, because that's who was scheduled to start, was for DTR to be similar to what Peyton Manning and Brock Osweiler did in Denver. That's all we were required to do. That's all we wanted them to do, was just, hey, I don't need you to be great. We don't need you to drive this thing. All we need you to do is simply just be a backup. Well, not just a backup, but, Brock Osweiler, Peyton Manning, the expectations weren't great for the quarterback spot. That's all we want. We can all agree there that that's all we wanted them to do and to be. Well, it's safe to say Joe Flacco has exceeded those expectations. He's much better than Brock Osweiler was in 2015. He's much better than even Peyton Manning was in 2015. So if that's the case, and we just saw that this defense is capable of playing like the Browns defense that we know on the road, which, by the way, I want to point out, they played great against Pittsburgh. That was a road game. They played great against Baltimore. That was a road game. And they played great against Houston. That was a road. It's 3 road games. The Browns have played 8 of them. That's almost half of them. Really, the reputation that the Browns had for being road frauds, if we really look at it, come from a bad game against the Colts that you ended up winning, a bad quarter in a drive in Seattle. Outside of that, they were pretty solid in that game. And then 2 bad fourth quarters when the wheels kind of came off because of turnovers in Denver and LA. That's what built the Browns are road fraud reputation. So maybe, just maybe, it was a little bit of an overblown thing when it comes to that road stuff. Maybe some of those numbers were more coincidence than actual evidence of something going on there. But that was another thing that the Browns needed to prove. Let me veer onto this road to talk about the defense. The Browns needed to prove that they could play they could play the same level of football that they're capable of playing at home. Right? I walked into this game and saw that Case Keenum was going to start and said to myself, I need to see the Browns blow them out. And the reason I wanted to see the Browns blow them out was I needed this to feel like Arizona. I needed this to feel like Tennessee. Because if Houston does not have CJ Stroud, this is basically like playing Arizona or Tennessee. No disrespect to the Texans, but they know what it is. And if you're going to go and play one of those teams, it should not feel like when you played the Bears, right? The Bears game was way too close. It should not have been that close. It really had no reason to be that close. This should feel like one of those 2 games if you want to see this team go far, right? Because a good team sees food like Case Keenum at quarterback and eats it. And that's what they did. That's what they did. They saw an opportunity, took advantage of that opportunity, and then pounced on that opportunity and showed people we can be the same dominant defense we were against Houston, in Houston, that we were when we played Tennessee at home, then when we played Arizona at home, then when we played Pittsburgh at home. We could be that same defense on the road, even a little banged up. That was a big point to make. We weren't really all worried about the offense's production on the road. It was really just a defensive thing. But that was important for the Browns to prove to themselves. And again, you see that, and now you don't have those road fraud concerns when it comes to the defense. Now you don't have those concerns about the offense. You don't really have those fears about being able to move the ball because Joe Flacco has been throwing for 300 yards ever since he got here. And you look at this Browns team and you say, this is pretty much how I felt about them after that Baltimore game. Now, they haven't beaten a team like Baltimore, and they won't have the opportunity to beat a team like Baltimore. If you're a cynic, you can point out the fact that, hey, the Browns haven't really played anybody who's playing well, right? The Jaguars weren't playing well when you played them. The Texans weren't playing well when you played them. They were also playing with a backup quarterback, and we know that the Browns have backups in too, but it's not like you beat the Ravens again. And I can understand that, but you did beat the Ravens, right? So you know that if you have quarterback play comparable to what you had in that game against the Ravens, you have a chance. And Joe Flacco has been not similar to Deshaun Watson in terms of how they get it done, but in terms of effectiveness, it's been pretty similar. So, yeah, if you thought they were contenders after that game, if you thought they were contenders after they beat Baltimore, well, hell, how can they not be contenders now? You look up and down the AFC and you see teams you think the Browns can beat, right? I think the three teams that Browns fans would be a little worried about Baltimore, who you beat, Miami, who you haven't played, and Buffalo. Now, Buffalo, we'll see where they are at the end of the season. They have the tendency to be a bit of a hot and cold team, right? They'll have these hot runs. We'll talk about, oh my God, the Buffalo Bills are so scary. And then it changes. The whole narrative about them changes in a couple of weeks. So given that they have a history of being streaky, I really wouldn't get too set in my expectations about the Buffalo Bills because they are a very streaky team. Miami's an interesting one. They've beaten a good team in Dallas. We'll see how they look against a physical team. And I believe Dallas is a good team. I don't think they're a very physical team. But they'll play a physical AFC North team next week in Baltimore. I'm interested to see how they respond to that, because I look at Miami and I think it could go multiple ways. It could either be a disaster for the Browns defense because they like to play a lot of man coverage and they have all that speed, or it could be a feast for the Browns defense because they rely on all that speed and the Browns have this much strength at defensive line. So it could really change. I have no clue what to expect with them against Miami. And then with Baltimore, we know what it is. We played them all the time. We played them 2 times this year. We know what Baltimore is. We know what they aren't. You know that you could throw Baltimore a little bit. You can run on Baltimore a little bit. But, Baltimore has Lamar Jackson, and that's always an X factor that you have to worry about when it comes to playing the Ravens, right? Lamar's always a factor. But man, if you're looking at the playoffs and you only see 3 teams that kind of make you sweat, well, you're probably a contender. Not a contender because you make the playoffs, and by default, everybody who makes the playoffs are technically contenders. No, you're an actual contender. Let's say the Browns get to a playoff run where they play Jacksonville, Kansas City, and Baltimore, Miami, or Buffalo. If the Browns go through a playoff run like that, where they only have to play one of those 3 teams in those 3 weeks, I strongly believe the Browns can get to the Super Bowl. And I wouldn't be too shocked if they won it. This is a really, really good Browns team, right? We've kind of talked about the story of them. We talked about what they needed to prove, what they did prove on Sunday. We've talked about all of that. But what we can talk about now is just how good this team is. And again, it starts with the defense, but it doesn't just end there because you have playmakers on offense. So actually, let's show the offense some love, because that's who really showed out the most this week was the offense. We talked about Joe Flacco having a career renaissance, playing some of the best football he's played since the early 2010s. What we haven't talked about is the fact that Amari Cooper is playing the best football of his career in Cleveland. And for me, this is so cathartic. This is so enjoyable for me simply because there was nobody who wanted Amari Cooper to be a Cleveland Brown in 2015 when he came out of Alabama more than me. Like I was just such a big Amari Cooper fan when he came out of Alabama. I really, really wanted the Browns to get him. I thought that he would be like one of the best receivers in the NFL for a very long time. And it's been interesting how Amari Cooper's career has gone, because it seems like he's never been given the opportunities a guy with his talent should. So he's never been viewed in the way that he should. Like he had those 2 years in Oakland where they treated him like a number one wide receiver his rookie and sophomore year. And then after that, it was just injuries up and down with him. And then they traded him to Dallas. He goes to Dallas and he's technically a number one option, but they also have CeeDee Lamb and Michael, all these guys that they're trying to fit in on this rotation. And he just kind of gets not lost in the shuffle, but becomes part of the shuffle instead of the main piece. And I think that really halted the perception of Amari Cooper, right? Since he was in Dallas and so many people watched him in Dallas, they thought to themselves, Amari Cooper, that's a number 2 receiver. He was a number 2 receiver in Dallas. He gets traded to Cleveland, basically to replace Odell Beckham, right? Because the Browns lost Odell Beckham that year. They needed a replacement. They needed a one receiver. They traded for Amari Cooper. And like, let's be honest, when they traded for Amari Cooper, this shit felt random. It was so random when they traded for Amari Cooper, because you have to remember at that time, we had no idea who was playing quarterback for the Cleveland Browns at that point. Like Baker Mayfield decided he did not want to play that final game of the season, which in my mind meant that Baker Mayfield was never going to play a game for the Cleveland Browns again, because he actively chose not to play a game for the Browns. I know people are going to give him his excuses for not doing that, but that's what happened, right? Myles Garrett was on the injury report too that week. He decided to play. Baker didn't, because Baker talked to his agent, talked to his family. This is what he said in the press conference, and decided he didn't want to play. So you knew Baker was gone. And the offseason happened, and you trade for Amari Cooper, and you're like, who are we going to pair Amari Cooper up with? And then they trade for Deshaun Watson, and it started to make sense. But it was an awkward, weird trade when you made it. Turned into one of the best trades you made in all of franchise history. Amari Cooper, absolute dog, having the best year by far when it comes to yardage in his career. He'll probably match his touchdown high that he reached in Cleveland last year, 9 touchdowns. And you look around and you say to yourself, Amari Cooper has played the best football of his life in Cleveland. And where has that ever been true, right? Where somebody like Amari Cooper, a big name outside of like when he got drafted, gets traded to Cleveland by a team like the Cowboys, and then all of a sudden gets better because the Browns know what to do with them. Browns are a good organization now. You know, all those jokes about the Browns is the Browns. We're a better organization than any fan base that makes those jokes. Like, I don't understand why people still try to make those jokes. We are a better fan base than everybody who tries to make those jokes. I mean, not better fan base, better organization than anybody who makes those jokes. Like, the Browns are one of the best 7 organizations in the NFL right now. They really know what they're doing. But Amari Cooper, big sign, big player there. David Njoku, huge, right? He's been having a career year as well with 760 yards. He's already, 60 over his career high, and he's just stacking on top of that. He's blown through his expectations. He's the man. He's the man. Both Amari Cooper and David Njoku have blew through their expectations for this year that we set in August. So just great play there, right? You don't have the line. You don't have the run game that you used to have. You don't have Nick Chubb to rely on. But this team is so loaded that you just have more guys to go to, right? Okay, we don't have Nick Chubb. Our offensive line stinks, which means our run game stinks. What are we going to rely on? Amari Cooper, David Njoku, and sprinkling a little bit of Elijah Moore. Defensively, like, do I even have to get that thing started? You lose Maurice Hurst, who was a pivotal player to your rotation, and Shelby Harris comes in, takes those snaps, and it ain't like you lost a damn thing. Jordan Elliott stepping up. You lose Obo Okoronkwo, who was pivotal. We were so upset when he went out. And he might come back, by the way. But we were so upset when Obo went out. Alex Wright has stepped in. You haven't missed Obo. As good as Obo was, you haven't missed him. Alex Wright stepped in, filled that role completely. Juan Thornhill, Ronnie Hickman, Deron Harmon stepping in for Ronnie McLeod, and then Grant Delpit getting filled in with DeAnthony Bell. The depth of this team gives you hope not only for this year, but also for next year if you happen to lose a player because of free agency. I ain't even talk about JOK, man. By the way, JOK's wearing that green dot. JOK's wearing that green dot, and I'm telling you, trouble's here, baby. And it's good trouble for the Cleveland Browns, because that signifies to me that there was a development process with JOK, right? When JOK first got here, we all knew what it could be. We all and make all of these plays around the field, but we knew that there was a development price that we had to pay because he was smaller and he was unique. And when somebody's smaller and unique, you gotta let that stuff grow before you run with it. So for the longest time, we had him at Sam. Well, not Sam, at Will. We didn't have him at Mike, middle linebacker. We had him playing a little bit, a smaller responsibility. We were taking him on and off the field in certain situations because, again, we were developing JOK. Well, they gave JOK the green dot instead of Sione Takitaki, which tells me they believe JOK has developed and is ready to shine for a bigger role. He's ready to not leave the field, which means, hey, you already have a playmaker that's always on the field in Denzel Ward. You already have a playmaker in Myles Garrett. If you can add JOK to that and legitimately have 3 levels of 3 guys who you could argue are playing the best football at their position. One guy at corner, you got like 3 guys at corner, to be honest. And then a linebacker who's playing at the highest level of the NFL. And then you have an edge rusher who is the best defensive player in the NFL. Name me a defense that's had that. I'm not trying to hype people up for no reason. I was slow to this Joe Flacco thing for a reason, right? I didn't want to get wrapped up in hype again, because I got wrapped up in hype with other players, and it did a disservice to people who watch the channel, to people who listen to me. So I wanted to make sure before I get here and start saying something crazy, that is something that I 100% believe can happen. And I'm sitting here on Tuesday, December 26, 2023. And I'm telling you right now, Cleveland Browns fans, I 1,000% believe the Cleveland Browns to be a real Super Bowl contender for the rest of the season. They're going to make the playoffs. And I think they're a real contender. Now, if they get a big injury here or there, knock on wood, pray that doesn't happen. Okay, we'll reevaluate. But they stay healthy for the rest of the year. They are a Super Bowl contender. They are a team as dangerous as Baltimore, as dangerous as Buffalo, as dangerous as Miami. They're right there in that conversation. But that's what I think. Let me know what you think. Appreciate y'all for joining me and listening to me. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.